G'day guys, it's Tarek here from the Functional Training Institute for another great episode of the High Performers interviews. And the whole principle behind this, the whole ethos that I want to get across is to bring the best minds, the best coaches who have been doing great things for a very long time, and just to extract their wisdom, their knowledge, and hopefully impart some of that wisdom into you listeners, viewers, so that you guys can become better coaches and maximize the impact that you can have on your clients and athletes. To that end, I want to welcome my good friend, Steve Cotter, who I've known for a number of years, to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks a lot, Tarek. It's nice to be able to sit and talk with you today.
Yeah, likewise. Looking forward to delving in as deeply as we can go in terms of your journey and some of the principles and your philosophies on movement. Because I think one of the things, it's easy for us to be hedged in one particular mode of understanding, i.e. kettlebells. He's the kettlebell guy, and that'd be an interesting kind of concept, because if we're stuck in this kind of tech mentality, sometimes we can lose the essence of who we are, and we can start to go us versus them. And I think what's key here is that Steve and I have been able to collaborate, even though at times we've been doing some of the same stuff. We still have had that space to have great conversations and to respect each other, and hence why Steve's on the show today. And we're very grateful to have him. Steve, firstly, a little bit about your story, your background. I suppose going back way back to 2002 with your involvement at the time with Dragondoor.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So definitely, I was a very early adapter to the entire what we can call the modern kettlebell phenomenon in its nascent days, which was early 2002, as you say. And prior to that, I had an extensive background in Chinese martial arts from the time I was 12 years old, up until my early 30s. I was very heavily involved with practicing and teaching and, doing all things Chinese martial arts, the meditation, the medicinal aspects, the sparring, the full contact, the weapons, right? And so that sort of informed me to where when I saw the kettlebell as an early adapter, it was the martial artist that was seeing it and saying, hey, this is something that's useful in the sense of how a martial artist is going to see it, where I'm looking to train. At that, of course, looking back, it's easy to say. At that time, I wasn't thinking so clearly about it, but it was just an intuitive, like, yes, that looks like something that's good. I can resonate with that, and of course, there was no kettlebells were just starting, and it wasn't traditional, it was internet. And so I saw it in a catalog initially, and it's like, hey, what's that? That looks, I didn't have access to Olympic lifting. Had I had access to Olympic lifting at that time, maybe I would have liked that, right? But the going to the gym thing just never translated to feeling like it was making you a more skillful martial artist in that sense. So I had done that, that whole thing, but it wasn't really going anywhere. It was more like bodybuilding. And so the kettlebell was like, yeah, that's something. And it took me probably maybe a year of seeing those advertisements in the, Dragondoor Quarterly. It was called Vitalic's catalog at that time. And, I'd see this advertisement. Finally, I got my hands on the kettlebell, and I right away, did a swing, and just from seeing pictures, and hadn't even seen videos yet, and just kind of figuring out, okay, do this and try to snatch it. And it just felt right away, boom, that connection, the ground up. I was like, boom. From there, I immediately got my own kettlebells, right? I just trained myself at home with it, right? The first Pavel's it was a DVD. No, VHS. It was a VHS. Russian kettlebell challenge, right? So I was like, learn the moves off of that. After maybe a year training myself, I met Pavel in 2003. I went to his course in Minnesota. Immediately we connected. He's like, oh, you're very good. You're flexible. You're strong. This and that. And oh, and you can teach. You can teach, comrade, like that. So, you know, because I'd been teaching martial arts for years before that, right? So I kind of knew how to communicate in terms of, okay, stand like this and now breathe like that. And, you know, so I very quickly adapted into that and became one of the instructors in Pavel's program, you know, senior instructor, and worked with Pavel for about, you know, for about 3.5 years, you know, working. And back then it wasn't that big. It was like 3 or 4 events a year there would be, you know, and you got to realize back then there was no Strong First. Strong First is an offshoot of RKC. There was no IKFF. I didn't, you know, actually I founded IKFF in 2008. You know, there was none of the Russian organizations, you know, Rudneff or any of these guys that wasn't for at least another more than a decade later. You know, those guys came like a decade later. So there was like that was the only show in town, you know, back in the beginning days. And it was Mike Mahler, it was Steve Maxwell, it was myself, it was Jeff Martone, Andrew Duquesne, you know, Nate Morrison and Rob Lawrence. I think that was like the first, you know, group of senior instructors teaching these courses with Pavel. So yeah, I mean, a long time ago. And from that time, you know, lots of experiences, but the kettlebell world just continued to grow. We started seeing, oh, there's these guys in Russia doing, you know, crazy things. And, you know, how do I learn about that? So because there was no real kettlebell sport in 2002, we didn't have any of that technology, you could say, any of that methodology. It was more like rip it and rip it, and, you know, put 5 reps and put it down, 10 reps, whatever, you know. And there's guys over there doing 100 reps. Like, what? How's that? You know. So now the world has been opened. You know, like if you come into kettlebells now, you have a richness of options in terms of, you can learn from any number of great, you know, either athletes or, you know, highly accomplished coaches, teachers, you know. So but it wasn't like that back then. We were creating, you know, the market in a sense. And so, you know, it's been but I'm still involved with kettlebell, right? So we're almost at 20 years. It's 2020. So, you know, 18-year journey that still continues. And it's changed, it's taken different shapes along the way. And it's all about growth and progression and evolution. It's like life itself, right? Because like the way that I express kettlebell, the way that I teach it, the way that I like to move with it, it's completely different than what my mindset was, you know, when I was 32 years old. Now I'm 50, you know. So it's not about the age necessarily, it's about stages of life and, you know, the whole entirety of it, the mindset, the physicality, you know, the art. And then, of course, it's different if it's a profession or if it's a hobby. Kettlebells have been, my profession has been connected to it, you know, since then. So literally part of that was not just, oh, this cool thing of kettlebell. It was the early days of an emerging market that hadn't previously existed. Because you're talking 2002, internet was still very young, and fitness and internet was nascent. And actually the pioneers really of making money on the internet through fitness, the early pioneers were basically like Dragon Door was one of the early pioneers. There was a few before, but not many. And, you know, so just kind of seeing that and like watching what was going on too, because, okay, now they're doing seminars and, you know, workshops and certifications, and they're doing DVDs, and, you know, people want to learn this. And so it was like trial by fire in a sense. I didn't come into it thinking, oh, this is going to be my career, right? It's just like, oh, this is really cool. And then all of a sudden, well, this guy's doing that. Well, maybe I can do that. I can do that, right? Like, maybe I'll just try to do what he's doing, right? Kind of. So it's very organic in that sense, just exposure. But, you know, when we look at it now, like kettlebells is an industry of itself. It's an ubiquitous fitness tool. If you're in fitness and you're not educated about kettlebells, it's almost to the point where you're obsolete to certain people. I'm not saying you're obsolete, but I'm saying that to certain people, if you're a trainer and someone comes and they're like, I want to learn kettlebells, and you can't provide that service, they're going to find a different trainer, right? So it's no longer like, oh, what's that weird looking thing? It's a crucial, important part of the entire fitness landscape, to where everybody has seen a kettlebell, everybody has done something, or knows something about a kettlebell. And of course, there's vast differences in terms of technique and exposure and experience, but it's no longer just an oddity that, oh, I don't know, I don't think that's ever going to take off. Like, you were wrong if you thought the kettlebells wasn't going to make it, because the kettlebells it's here to stay, right? It's ubiquitous.
And
So
that's it, Steve. One of my things was, I remember 12 years ago, I picked up one of your DVDs at the time, actually.
yeah.
To be honest, I can't remember the name of it, but it was an early DVD, and you've done numerous ones of those. And so that kind of was my first encounter with you as an early adopter of the kettlebells, and I fell in love with it ever since then, which kind of took me on the journey in 2013 to meeting you and training with you and having that privilege. And then from there on, I thought, well,
Privilege
your
for me.
philosophies. Yeah, what struck me were your philosophies, your openness, and willingness to engage. So what I wanted to ask you, and the audience and the viewers and listeners would be interested in this, is there's always this dichotomy, right? So here you are, you're an early adopter with the Pavel system, if you like, and John DeCane, 2002. So you spent a few years. Part of that pivotal shift was kind of seeing the Girovics and how they performed. I suppose, what was your main point of difference with IKFF, and I suppose why, and what was the inspiration behind starting IKFF?
Yeah, that's a great question. And now it's like, you're asking me at that point in time when I created IKFF, and if you ask me like, what is it now, it's a different answer, you see. So
Yeah.
So at that time, what it was that I became aware, and I was also an early adapter, also in the kettlebell sport, in the sense, of course, there had been a tradition in Soviet Union, but in terms of like America and the West, none of us knew anything about it. And before that, we didn't know anything about kettlebell. So you got to look at kind of the history of the whole development. And I was kind of at various transitional stages of that. And you even mentioned DVD. That's like a relic from the past. Like, what is a DVD? So if you have some young viewers here, DVD, right? But that was a thing where it's like, okay, early pioneer, where, okay, there's a market for DVDs where you're going to learn kettlebells from a DVD, right? Like, YouTube was still baby at that point, when that started. But anyway, so the kettlebell sport in 2005, myself and 7 other Americans had the idea. It was myself and one other, she had the idea, like at a dinner, and like, hey, let's go to Russia. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And before you knew it, was 8 of us, and we went over to Moscow in 2005 to the World Kettlebell World Championships there. And I saw, I witnessed in that event was Ivan Denisov. He broke the world record for double 32 jerks. He did 176 in 10 minutes, because previous it was Mishin had the world record of 170, and he got 176. And then that was just recently tied, like last year, by this other Ivan Markov, I think, did 176. But anyway, that was like, the point is, the best lifters in the world were there, from all, Russia mostly, but you had Ukraine, and you had, so it's like, all of a sudden it's like this group of Americans show up, and somebody, it was good, because I wouldn't have done it myself, but one woman, Lorraine Patton, she was a dentist and very organized, so she like hooked up with like the visa stuff, and this other guy worked for the airline, so he knew Russia, spoke Russian, and so we had it good there. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to just show up in Russia not knowing anybody. That's not, if you're an English speaking person, right? So, because they are not adapting to Americans, you know what I mean? Like, if you're thinking, oh, I'm just gonna roll in, no, not in a place like that. Like, And on a different show, I can tell you some funny stories about Russia and vodka and my first trip to Russia.
Maybe another episode.
So, we're at this 2005 World Championship. I'm seeing the best lifters in the world. And I'm like, wait a second, I'm Steve Cotter. Okay, whatever. But I'm a younger man, probably a little more arrogant back then when you're, not a 50-year-old guy like now, but you're still trying to find your way. So it was more like, kind of walking in with a strut. But that's how I always walk, right? But it's like, because I was born in New York, so it's like that bebop. But, and then it's like, by then I'm like one of the, I'm one of the guys that's becoming known in the US, say, at this point. Again, 2005, Pavel's the most famous. He was the first. And then you have a couple other of us that are getting a bigger name, Mike Mahler, Steve Maxwell, myself, primarily we're, and so it's like I show, and I had a couple DVDs maybe at this time, and, starting to do seminars at, 2004, 2005, I was doing seminars around the US, and, so it's like I show up and all of a sudden, the first night I see warming up, it's Anton Anasenko, and he's like, he doesn't speak English at that time at all, but he's like a champion, like they say, I'm champion, like that. I'm like, oh, you're the champion? He's like, so he's just, and I'm seeing these guys warm up. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be interesting. And then, the next day we do the event, and it's like, the guy next to, at that event, I did 42 jerks with the double, and my best up to that point had been 60, 10 minutes. So I was doing like 6 reps a minute, and that was my goal. But at minute 7, I put it down, so I got the 42, and the guy next to me did 155. That was Anasenko, so it was like with double jerks, double 32s, right? So like all of a sudden I'm sitting there after my set, and it's like I'm feeling smaller, right? I'm feeling like I don't belong here, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, it's like, so that was what first put the seed in my mind. It's like, okay, Pavel and stuff is my friend, and we were friends, and, so I liked all that stuff, but it's like, I'm an honest person. And when it comes to physical, I'm very honest because I'm coming from the martial arts, and I may not be honest about everything. I may not have always been honest about everything in my entire life. Cause, we all tell different big or little lies about different things, right? Oh, hey, there's no Santa Claus or whatever. But it's like, when it comes to that, I have a lot of integrity. When it comes to, I just want better. I don't care about the art. I don't care about what you call it. Like, if you're going to show me that you can beat me, I'm going to want to learn, and I'm going to want to figure out how I can, now you can't beat me anymore. Maybe I'm going to be able to beat you after a while. You see? So, and that's like, just, it's the practical. And I saw these guys, and they're like, I'm not at that level. And I didn't feel good at that moment at first, because I was overwhelmed, like I don't belong here. But then as the night went on, I start relaxing and getting over it, because we put pressure on yourself and stuff. And you have to learn how to deal with pressure, like it's the reason why we age, because you need to learn your whole life, and you're still not going to learn all of it. But it's like, yeah, I thought I was a man at 32, but it's like, now it's like I was still a little kid at that age in a lot of ways, right? So it's like, but you overcome that insecurity, and then it's like, okay, now the analytical mind turns on, and I'm like, how does that guy do 3 times the reps? How come I'm doing, 80 snatches and that guy's able to do 180? And why is he doing, 2.5 times more when he's the same size as me? And I'm like, it can't be 3 times big, stronger. Can't be 3 times, more conditioned. Because I've always been a highly conditioned athlete, maybe not kettlebell. I came into kettlebell later, not as a kid, but I mean, it wasn't that. Then I was like, technique. It's because his technique is 3 times better. And then it was like that so that planted the seed, and then I was still with RKC, but then it was like, now there's this interest in the kettlebell sport, because I understand there's a better way. And again, I'm using the word better. That's just for me. I'm not trying to make a comparison for everybody to say, oh, I don't want someone to take a sound bite and say, oh yeah, kettlebell sport is better than hardstyle. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not for me to say what's better for someone else. I know what I like better and what's better for me. See, so, but at that stage, I was seeing it that way. 2005, like, okay, the technique's better because he can get better results measured by science, by numbers, not based on, oh yeah, I'm using this much effort. No, the number is telling you that's the work. It's very, math is the truth. So maybe the only truth that we can always turn to that stays that way, right? Because all the other stuff gets all infiltrated by opinions and all these other interests. Math, like the numbers do not lie. So if you can get your training and you're able to, and I'm not saying it's all data and that's the only thing that matters, because there's intuition and there's psychological factors, but I'm saying it cannot be denied. And I'm not going to get into a discussion about what's, because if we're doing track and field and you run if it takes me 11 seconds and it takes you 10, we're not going to talk about styles, right? You're faster than me. You beat me. And it's the same thing in all these other things too, because it's like, so I saw that and I saw the level, it's very high level, and I wanted that level, but we didn't have access to that level. Pavel didn't know, and that's no shame against Pavel, because it's like, it's not for everybody. And I never took it to the highest levels, but I learned a lot and I was able to elevate my level by a whole lot, and then difference.
Sorry.
It influenced the way I teach. And that's the main, from a teaching perspective, I was able to gain exposure, appreciate the science, and bring that into how, so again, that's going back with the early days of IKFF, but, it's evolved a lot since then, where it's a martial art. And that's because that's who I am. And it took me coming full circle before I realized all those years, it was like I was teaching martial arts, and the kettlebell was the method and the tool and the audience, because I came from the traditional martial arts, and it's like, it's like now you're the lone wolf. You're not in the family anymore. Now you're on your own. So I was like a Ronin. I didn't have a school, but I still had the art in me. And then the kettlebell was like, when I touched the kettlebell, that enabled me to express my martial. And that's why I was a quick adapter to the kettlebell, because I had the martial movement. But I didn't realize until a few years ago, looking back, that all those years, if you ask me back then, if you asked me what IKFF was, it was like, I wrote that article for CrossFit Magazine back in 2006, hard style, soft style, the critical analysis, whatever. But people started calling it soft style. That was because of the article that I wrote using that term. In retrospect, I wouldn't say that now, because now I have different understanding, but it was more of a contrast. Like, it's not hard style. Like, you got hard style, you got soft style. I was saying it like that to say, like, you don't need to like use maximal effort in every rep. You need to just kind of like loose and then boom, versus like trying to use, maximal speed and power. And, and then so people had that impression because my communication wasn't clarified at that stage, right? It was like, what I was doing, it wasn't hard style. And it was more like kettlebell sport, because that was a stronger influence in the sense, because I recognized the high level. And then Valerie Fedorenko was the first true kettlebell champion that started teaching in the West. Okay, so really, if you're going to tell the history, you got Pavel, modern history, you got Pavel, he brought the kettlebell. You got Fedorenko, he brought the kettlebell sport in terms of access, because he was in US and he spoke a little bit of English, and then you got different people in Australia, you and Dan, for sure. I mean, you guys are pioneers in that. And, myself as well. I came and I did this and I took it and I started bringing it, so you have people that were, but anyway, at that time, that's what it was. It was, more like kettlebell sport, because and that was the early days of IKFF. Is like, we're going to do it for 3 minutes, we're going to do it for 6 minutes, we're going to do the reps, but now it's like, you ask me what is IKFF, it's the martial art of kettlebell, because it's movement. And I don't actually care about style. It's my style, your style. There's no style.
It's really fascinating, Steve. Can we focus a little bit on this sort of dichotomy between hard and soft style? And I suppose maybe if we can debunk any of the kind of myths, so to speak, of that maybe misinterpretation, or maybe that skewed interpretation of that article, and perhaps you can tell the viewers, whether it's truth or factual, whatever, what really the differences are, and can they coexist? Because I'm a big believer that we have relaxation and tension built in to all of our movement practices, which really comes from martial arts. So could you maybe spend a little bit of time focusing on that? Because I believe that's quite an important concept.
Amazing framing of your question there in directing that, because appropriately, I mean, if I were to do an article, it would have to be a updated revision, kind of encompassing a lot more body of study behind it. Whereas, contextually, the article is 2006. Glassman reached out to me at that time and said, we'd love to have you involved with the CrossFit community. And, I didn't ultimately go in that direction, but at least in the early part of that, I wrote an article for the journal, and that was that article, right? So that went out in CrossFit Journal, and got a lot of reads on it. And at that time, yes, that was where I was coming from. It was more of like a anti-hard style, because I had personal resentments and personal misgivings with the and it was just, I was not. Again, I wasn't dropping F-bombs in the article to that level of immaturity, but it was just, at that time in my life, I took it to where it was like I had a mission to like show, there was a bone to pick, I guess, in that sense. And that definitely skewed it. Yet, there is truth in it still to this day. So I'm not saying I'm taking it back. I'm saying that it wouldn't give the full service to the kettlebell to limit it to a hard soft discussion.
Sure.
Okay, but if we want to discuss the hard soft, we can still discuss the hard soft. And the bigger picture, where that comes from, hard style, it's a brand name. Okay, it's basically a cliche that was first coined with RKC by Pavel, and then later kind of got carried into the Strong First when Pavel formed the Strong First. System wise, it's the same system, though. It's just different companies now, in terms of the methodology and what's taught and kind of their ethos of training. And but hard style, the term, it's borrowed from the martial arts. And so that was, Pavel just borrowed that from the martial arts. So in the martial art discussion, you have the discussion of hard style, soft style. And the hard style martial arts are associated with particular martial arts, but, as a broader sense, you have the soft style. So anything that's not a soft style is a hard style. But in a more specific, it would be, similar to Shotokan, Kyokushinkai. We're very like, like, I'm going to overpower you. I'm going to smash through you in a very linear oriented, and I'm going to condition my bones and, crack the Maka board and, whatever, and get my shins to where I'm just kicking tree, so it's just, that's the hard style approach in martial arts. Whereas, there is a school of thought, in the Chinese martial arts, a soft style, which is based more on a redirective. And, you could even say an art like Jujitsu, you could say that could be a soft art in how it's, because it's about leverage. And if you give me pressure, I allow you to give me pressure. I'm not trying to create more pressure necessarily, right? I'm letting you, and now you're stepping into my trap, so the term becomes a sort of a binary, kind of duality if you kind of speak of it in that way. And I don't think that's the higher lesson of it, you know, so I wouldn't teach it the same way now. I would say that the talk about style, um, it's the style of the practitioner. It's not the style of the brand, you know, because there's brand names. It's like, oh, this is my company, that's my company. So yeah, if I call what I do hard style, I'm gonna think that hard style is all, you know, the best thing, and you should do it that way, and whatever the principles that we say that is, right? But what I'm saying is, I don't care what your style is. I just care that you're good. I don't care what you call it. Like, you're a good practitioner. And then beyond that, you're a good educator. And I believe the good practitioner has to come before the good educator, because there's skin in the game. And you can be a good educator, but with things like kettlebell, it's physical education. I'm not going to trust somebody that's giving me theory of kettlebell, unless, you know, you have to have a baseline competency, which doesn't equate world-class athlete, but it equates to you've done your whatever number of reps is that number, to where, you know, maybe it's 1,000, maybe it's 10,000, but, you know,
So you got
you're
these
not
styles.
teaching you how to ride a bike when you never rode the bike. You fell off the bike a few times and you figured it out, and now you know how to ride a bike. And so now I'm going to let you teach me how. You know, it's like that. So practitioner, and then from practitioner, educator, you know, and now I have the ability to transmit that experience and model it. And because of the physical education requires a modeling that is not required in philosophy. Philosophy, we can just talk about it, you know, but I have to show you, okay, this is snatch. This is what it looks like. Here's the mistakes to avoid, you know, and here's what it's working.
So
You know, and
both have their place. I mean, and again, it's the style versus the essence.
yeah.
The
So
essence.
it's not like style comparison. It's like, it's how your movements look's gonna depend on your physiology, and it's gonna depend on your strengths and weaknesses. So if you move in like short, choppy movements, you're gonna be stout. You know, maybe oh, that's a hard style. That guy, he's like boom, boom, pop, popping everything compact. Where, you know, somebody else is like kind of like real fluid and just, you know, okay, that's how they move. I don't know what you're calling the style. So it kind of got diluted in a sense, and I definitely contributed to it. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm the only, but there was definitely, for a long time, and probably with a lot of people still is, this idea that there's hard style and there's do your voice sport, and that's the option. So if you're not doing kettlebell sport and you don't want to do that, then you do this, right? You do hard style. And what I'm saying, it's MMA. I'm saying there's no styles anymore. We're beyond those days, right? We're not trying to say, oh, boxing is better than judo, or jujitsu can beat, you know, wrestling and Muay Thai. No, it's like, you better be well versed in all ranges. And you're going to specialize in one. And if you're really good, you might specialize in two, but you're going to know how to defend against the other ones too. You're going to be
Totally.
capacity at a basic level in all of them, and then you're going to be great at one of them, right? And that's like MMA, and that's how it is, you know, for me, how I see the kettlebell too. So and then again, it's like, you want to get a workout, or are you an educator? If you're a kettlebell teacher and you're building your thing around that, well, you have to be honest enough to have exposure to the different, you know, maybe not you're going to be great at all of it, but you need to know something about kettlebell sport if you're a kettlebell instructor, you know, and you need to understand, you know, the essentials of what's called hard style, which is just basic kettlebell movement, you know, for fitness. It's just, it comes from the military. And the thing about it is, the guerrilla voice sport is the modern, and the hard style is the old style, in the sense that when kettlebells first was being used to train people, it was used with military in, you know, Soviet Union back in like the 1920s is when it was first kind of systematically programmed into, okay, this kettlebell tool is going to be a useful tool for preparing soldiers for, you know, basic training. And, then it evolved into, okay, competitive sport. And then from there, it evolved into systemizing the rules of the sport to where, now we can compete against different teams in different countries. So actually the kettlebell sport and the science of that, it came later. If it's like I got, a bunch of 18 to 20-year-old men here, and I got, 6 months to get them, or 6 weeks to whip them into shape, and they're going to go off on some adventure. Okay, the movements are going to be very kind of basic and kind of very easy to learn, and more like, boom, you're going to, and that's the best way that you would want to do that. And it's more, you're churning them out. If you want to develop the level of sophistication, that's not a 6-week, that you're going to be training for years to get that level of sophistication where now you're dancing with the kettlebell. So, again, it's not one way. It's just, that's my art has evolved in a certain way. And it's just, it goes through different expressions and stuff. And I actually just care that the instructor is good. I care that they care about the people they're serving, that they're attentive to the people they're serving, that their technique is fundamentally sound, and that they have a humble enough attitude, and that they're able to learn and continue to improve and, fill in gaps as they appear, and be willing and able to identify those gaps, and willing and able to, to fill those gaps. And that doesn't have to be done in public. That can be done in private. But there, it's just like when you and Dan, flew out. And I knew you didn't fly out just to train with me, but that was part of your agenda. I know you went and trained with some other people when you're in the States, and you kind of maximized your trip. But, that's not, most people will do that. That's why you guys are successful, not from the one event with me per se, but just the fact that you have the openness to where it's like, what more can I learn, and increase that exposure, and become more well-rounded and more in depth. And that's something I have a tremendous amount of respect for, because that's professional integrity. And not everybody does that, in business, all kinds of businesses. It's like there's so much spent on protecting what you got and maintaining your position, to where it's like, I don't want any new stuff to come in because I have this fear of being replaced, and it's natural, and I understand it. And it's probably like an instinctual animalistic response. We feel threatened, but that's not something that I've really ever subscribed to. I believe that you got to stay relevant, and there's different ways of staying relevant. And it's not just about physical, because it's like, even in physical education, if it's about just being the best athlete, well, guess what? Your career is going to be shorter.
And I think what's fascinating about your journey, Stephen, that I admire, is that over a span of not just the 18 years, but if we were to narrow it down in terms of the kettlebell journey, you had this concept of the kettlebell for fitness, which you kind of were embedded in and with for a few years. But now what it seems like is that you've evolved over various stages, and you were the early adopter of both the kettlebell as a fitness tool and as a sport tool, as in the Russian style. But now it seems that the kettlebell is now adopted or adapted from you to IKFF as being a martial tool, if you will. So that's the kind of thing that struck me, is the kettlebell can be a fitness tool, and it's great for that 6-week block, and you still have to be good at that, but it can evolve into something so much greater. That does take years to cultivate. Even me, I haven't used it as long as you. For me, it's 12 years. I'm still learning. I'm still coming up with my own katas. Can you speak a little bit about that now in the present state, and maybe the future identity of the kettlebell from your perspective, and where it can go, and maybe some lessons for the viewers and listeners?
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely. And there's the practitioner, and then there's the teacher, or the educator. And maybe I don't want to use the word teacher, because it's not for me to say, but it's, the service, really. It's about the service. And so if someone says, oh, that's my teacher, that's my instructor, that's professor, I kind of leave it for someone to say that, versus me saying, oh, I'm the teacher. Because it's like, if you position yourself as a teacher, that means you're not able to be the student, you know, and ultimately I'm interested in being the student because it's a relentless pursuit of better. You know, it's about growing, it's about learning, it's not about maintaining position. Because it's like, you know, I want to learn martial arts from someone that has superior technique than me, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to get better. If I'm just training with guys that I'm already better than, then yes, I get to maintain the throne, but it's a very small throne. It's never going to, you know. And so with that, it's from a practitioner point of view, it's the martial art. Really, it brought me, you know, about, well, 2.5 years ago, I came back to the study of the martial arts through the Jujitsu, through the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, you know, very fortunate to be in one of the great lineages in the history, you know, the Ribeiro brothers, Shanji and Salo. Any of you guys that are Jiu-Jitsu guys, you know those names, because these guys are, you know, some of the best to ever do it. And, you know, so very fortunate. And then bringing my son, who's, you know, is going to be 17 in another week, you know, so he's been training with me for past 1.5 years, training with us, you know, so that kind of really matured my kettlebell too, because now for a long time, the kettlebell was the center of my training. It's like before that, it was the Kung Fu for all those developmental years, 12 to 30. And then it was, you know, college for 4 years when I studied and got my degree in kinesiology. Coming out of college, like, okay, now what? It's okay, now I'm going into fitness. And it was, you know, Bosu, one of my closest friends invented the Bosu. So I was doing Bosu, early adopter in that as well, because I was doing all the trade shows in the US when it was being made by hand. He was still taking like Swiss balls, cutting in half and like sealing it on one side with like duct tape and glue and staples, you know, going to like Idea and Ursa and all these, you know, club industry. And that was just before kettlebell. And then from that was like 2000 kettlebells. I started seeing it 2001, got my first like late 2001, you know, told you that story. And so, you know, but then in the last couple of years, coming back to the jujitsu, it's like jujitsu is now the center of everything for me. So now it's like I use the kettlebell as a practitioner because it supplements the conditioning that is favorable, that transfers well to the jujitsu. And for the jujitsu guys that want to do, you know, strength and power training, there's not going to be a better tool, you know, because it's so much martial art, the principle, everything, center line, and how you keep your elbows in, because it's like you don't want your elbows out. And guys that have poor lifting mechanics, and it's the same, you're like this in jiu-jitsu, your arm's getting taken. And it's somebody good, it's like if you give the elbow, you're not going to get it back. So we never, like, it's always, you're here with your elbows, you know. And so like the kettlebell, it's the same. And it's like, you know, the diamond concept, like framing and stuff, you know. So it's like, it's the perfect complement. Just the way it sits on the body, I can stay, and it's on my body. It's like I'm not holding it like I have to hold a dumbbell or a barbell. It's sitting, and everything's posture, you know, and structure, you know. And actually, like in jiu-jitsu, it's not like conditioning and strength doesn't matter, or muscle, but the best fighters in the world is not the guys that can lift the heaviest weight. It's never going to be that. It's the most skillful, because it doesn't matter if you're bigger, stronger, and how much you want to try to smash me. If I'm more skillful, you're the one that's going to end up being submitted, you know. And it doesn't, and you see it all the time, right? Guys can outweigh by 100 more than other martial arts too, because it's like in Muay Thai, you might be really good, but if you're 120 pounds and you're sparring with a guy that's no way, you're not going to be able to, you know. Whereas, yeah, self-defense for sure, but I mean in a sport, you know, but in jiu-jitsu, you see it very often. You can have guys that can very easily handle much larger, stronger guys, right? So because you have the benefit of the ground. So gravity is not working the same way as it would when you're vertical, where your body mass. Now all of a sudden, if you're smaller, and your back's on the ground, that you have a lot more leverage, because it's, so anyway, the point is that as a practitioner is because now I like using the kettlebell as a cross training, and it's very specific. I only have to do a few things because I'm getting my main training from the martial art. But from an educator, my interest has shifted in that. In the early days when I started, I wanted to establish my career. So it was like I wanted to impress the strong people. Power lifters, the strong people. Is like, okay, I want these guys to respect me. So I'm using the heavy kettlebells. I'm, doing strong stuff with it. And so it's like, okay, that guy's legit. That was my mindset. And I established my profession, my resume based on that initially. However, as I'm maturing as an individual and growing as a human and becoming a more developed human being, there's differences in the mindset and the objectives. So, my thing is I want to reach out and help as many people as I can, which means the audience is not the strong people. The audience is the people that have less strength, that need, that need help, that need, it's like, I want to help the elderly people. I want to help the kids. I want to help the people that are, less developed, or, and I'm not saying like, okay, kettlebells, it's easy to work with athletes. It's easy to work with fitness pros because you guys are already in the game and you're already fit. So it's like, yeah, let's just work out. You're going to pick it up quickly. But in terms of service to humanity, those people don't actually need me that much because they're already in shape. And yeah, they could do it with me and maybe I inspire them, but they could also learn it from any number of other people, right? I'm not, because fitness is like, there's lots of fit people. There's lots of people that love working out. There's CrossFit, and then it's no longer a novelty where it's like, oh, there's that one fit person. Everyone's fit now, to different degrees. But in general, compared to the population, unless they're the other population, which are the ones that are obese and are just completely anti-fitness, right? Of course, but those are the ones that need the help, you see? So it's like, I don't want to keep preaching to the choir necessarily. I want to be able to reach out into the broader and, okay, you have trouble, you're dealing with pain, you're dealing with stiffness, what can we do? And then graduate to the kettlebell, where now, 6 months ago you had a hard time walking and now you're able to swing a kettlebell for some reps. And you see that, you see the impact is so much greater there, right? So it's always an interesting journey, because with marketing has moved so much towards niche, to where it's like, if you want to really help people, it's like, okay, I'm working with special populations. But it's like, when you're an educator like you or I and others that have like a very in-depth background, you feel like you can teach anybody, right? Yeah, okay, you get a chance to work with a world-class athlete. I mean, that's always a pleasure. And some strength conditioning coaches, they set their business up to where that is their clientele, that they're, but that's a very small population, but, at the same, it forces people to be pigeonholed into, okay, I work with, elderly population, or I work with kids, or, but I work with everybody, because it's movement. You have a body, you breathe, you move. Kettlebells is not for everybody. Kettlebells is only for people that want the intensity. And I'd say, like, if you don't like to work hard, if you don't want to experience discomfort, kettlebells is not for you, because it's not something you can water down and make it digestible for everybody. Because if everybody was doing it, they wouldn't need kettlebells. We'd all be out of work, for that matter. So, it's kind of changed in that way, in the sense where I'm much more interested in the global social, but in terms of my professional and where I make my money, it's people in fitness, right? Because we're the ones that have the awareness, that are willing to invest time and money into pursuing further education and these experiences. And, so it's just that challenge of figuring out how to connect more and and the right ways of connecting, because really what I would love to see is the people in society that don't have that, to be able to develop that physicality and that strength of purpose through the physical education, where all the things that come with it, because the confidence, the belief in the self, the creative, and obviously the health and the well-being. So it's really it's a fitness, health, well-being continuum
Yeah,
versus.
I totally agree on that, Steve. And there's so many, for the listeners out there, so many golden lessons that you've provided there, because I totally agree. Like there's, like we call it the over 55s, the seniors. I've used the kettlebell for folk who are in their 70s, and it's just transformed them, just doing, as you say, centering it, going from a lying position to standing is transformational, and it empowers me, it empowered the client. And I do believe that for me, being able to help people with so-called special needs or disabilities, the kettlebell can be utilized and can be transformational for those folk as well. Now, I want to switch gears, kind of nearing toward the end of this interview. What would you tell the younger Steve from 18 years ago, in terms of the lessons and the maturity? Is there anything that particularly pops out that you'd tell the younger Steve to maybe pay heed to?
Yeah, certainly, emotions, the emotional energy. It's like you can describe it as, forces of light and forces of darkness, if you want to use that analogy. Or, if you're more religious, you can speak or think in terms of good and evil. If you're more, philosophical or maybe spiritual oriented, you may use terms like higher self and lower self. So the younger person would have bought a little bit more into society's narrative and trying to navigate society's narrative as far as what the expectations of others are and how I'm supposed to fit and how I'm supposed to present, and sort of trying to navigate that when you don't have a guidebook. And depending on, the family you grew up in and the society you grew up in, you may not have had a mentor even telling you or showing you how to do certain things. So if you're like me and you were raised by wolves, this is stuff that is just, there was no manual provided and you just have to figure things out. So I would, inform, let myself know that if you're not certain, it's okay to do nothing, because non-action is an action, and you don't want to act out of anger. You don't want to react out of extreme emotional, because emotion is very powerful. It can work in our favor, and it can also burn the whole village down if you allow it to, again, the ego. But that's one thing, is just, the hot-headedness. And yeah, I can be hot-headed. I'm not a guy that's, oh yeah, he's a hot-headed guy most of the time. But I was probably, you could probably get under my skin a little back then, where now I have more control over that and I don't allow it. And it's so it's about discipline. It's about discipline. And but if I look back, I don't think in terms of regrets. It's just about, you can say mistakes, because it was choices made that you realized afterwards did not produce positive results. So then you see it as a mistake. But at the same time, those previous experiences have informed the person that you are today. And I would say really just pressure makes diamonds, and embrace discomfort. And don't run away from discomfort. Don't run away from the dark side. Don't run away from the beast that is within. Rather, understand it and learn to face it and find the channel to be able to harness that power, and then it can serve you versus working against you. And I think when I was younger, I wasn't even acknowledging the beast. I was fitting into this narrative of like, oh, I'm a good person, I'm a nice guy. And so you end up, at least me looking back, I probably could have sabotaged myself unknowingly by having an outer focus of this is what is going to make people happy with me, and whatever that might have been in business or in, you know, whereas now it's a maturity where it's like I accept myself for who I am as I am, and I don't need to conceal any of it because I already recognize within myself that there are forces of light and there are forces of darkness. And the differential is in the discipline that is within my choice to operate. You see, and that's the thing. It is within our own capacity. And there may be exceptions. There may be certain traumatic things where a person doesn't really have conscious control, in which case they need some kind of help. But, you know, we're all crazy at some level, but, you know, most of us were able to be crazy and still function kind of in society, you know, and the craziness doesn't spill out into all over, you know, and then there's that some that, you know, an increasingly amount that seem to not have a handle at all on the craziness. But the point is that we cannot deny that. And that's what I would say to myself is, you know what, figure out what your dark side is, figure out what is the darkness, what is the pain, you know, and again, you can go deep and deep, and it gets, and training is, because everything is mind, you know, and body, that's just what you see. But, you know, the mind, it's the decision to do the thing, and it's okay, I'm doing the push-up, I'm swinging the kettlebell, it's the decision before the action. And, you know, and it's the breathing, and it's the psychology of dealing with the inner voice in your head, and the techniques and the science, right? It's all, and it's just, we don't know anything until we know. And then when we know what we know, but we still don't know the things we don't know. It's like when you know, when you feel it, you know it. And, you know, as Socrates said, we don't really know anything, you know, but we all know something. We just don't know as much as we would like to know, right? You know, so you,
Really appreciate that.
but what we do know is the lessons that we've learned, and the lessons we've learned is through the mistakes and the results of the mistakes. And then you arrive at a place where it's like, just relax, stay calm. And it's like, pressure is good, difficulty is good, discomfort is good. And it's, the set doesn't end in your last swing. The set ends after you put the kettlebell on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Said is that discipline that
champion isn't when he taps the other guy out. The champion is how he leaves the mat, you know, in life. And that's the thing about it, is just that discipline, that self-control. And
I think you've got that really, like, it's the whole idea is with hormonal, we have an ability to self-regulate, you know, rather than be dictated by upregulation of stress hormones or downregulation. So the whole idea is to have this self-mastery. And one term that really strikes me, I learned philosophy years back at university, is that wu wei, you know, that concept that you'd be familiar with.
yes,
Is don't just kind of try to go one way and beat that way. You've got to find a way to go around it, around that tree, around that wall, in a real harmonious kind of way. And that to me is sort of rung true with what the lessons that you've provided through your journey so far, which is powerful. And look, I look forward, Steve, for you to share a workshop. We guys, listeners, viewers, we will be doing a practical workshop with some of Steve's mobility flows and some of his kettlebell expertise, which will be in the next coming weeks. But I really appreciate, Steve, we appreciate your time and your energy.
I love connecting with you always. So I appreciate you asking me on.
Everything you've given. It's just, I always learn something when we have conversations, and we usually have lengthy conversations from places like China or anywhere in the world.
Yeah. It's either, I think it was Shanghai last time, or.
That's right. It was in Shanghai, in the city.
Well, we're both world travelers, that's for sure. And whenever we see each other, it's never at one of our homes. It's always in.
Yeah, look, really appreciate that, and looking forward to having you back on for a workshop. So all the best for you for now, Steve, and
Thank
we
you.
wish you in your next steps a great journey. And to the listeners, thank you for taking part in this. And of course, you want to find more about Steve Cotter. You've got an Instagram account.
Yeah, so it's Steve Cotter IKFF is my social media tag at Steve Cotter IKFF. And Instagram is my preferred mode of communication for someone just to reach out to me on DM and say, hey, I caught you on Tarek's show and want to say hi. So that's I like to just interact with people, you know.
That's perfect, and you give a lot. And look, in our VIP group, so this is for those who are in our VIP, Steve will be providing a workshop and opportunities to learn further from the master himself. So Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tarek. Thank you guys.